I started writing my memoirs before I even left the convent. I was in the convent for 25 years. I left home when I was 14 years old at a time when being in a convent was really strict. We were not allowed to write or read magazines or newspapers or watch television or use a telephone or anything like that. We were just cut off. So after living that life for 25 years, it wasn't always that rough, but the first 8 were pretty rough. But after 25 years of living that life, I decided to leave. And as I said, I had started to write my memoirs before I left. I've been out of the convent now for about 23 years, and I'm still working on that same book because I've been trying to make sense of it all, not just sense of it for me, but what does it mean about most of us? I mean, we all go through experiences, and we hope we learn from those experiences. We hope we gain some insights so we don't make the same mistakes over and over and over. So that's the struggle I've been going through with writing that book. When I first entered the convent at age 14, we prayed a lot and we studied a lot and we wore black skirts and white blouses. But eventually I wore the habit, and when I got the veil, I actually had my head shaved. That was not uncommon to do, because why would you have hair? Nobody ever saw your head. Your head was covered even when you went to bed at night. So it was an active community. It was an apostolic order. So after I finished my education, that was my bachelor's degree, I was sent to teach. My first assignment was a farming town in Kewaskum. I was a dismal failure. I got close to the kids, but the superiors in religion didn't think I was doing a very good job because they expected us to teach, and that was it. And I ended up being friends with the children, and that was not good news. So my most memorable adventure from those years was riding a tandem bike with my habit and getting the habit wound in the spokes of the tire and the wheels and having to be cut out and facing the humiliation of having to sew the pieces back on my skirt and wear it for 3 years. That was my punishment. After that 1 year, I was sent to a coal mining town in Pennsylvania. And that was better because the people were poor. I have found that, in general, people who have less are more generous. These people would bring chickens to the door because they couldn't pay their bill, and that was very touching. When I was there, I learned to play the guitar, and I was the parish organist, and I managed to mix a little with the people. A year later, I was transferred. And my next assignment was back in Wisconsin, and I was teaching there. I'd been there for almost a year when one day this young girl walked in. She was from the coal mining village. She just walked right into my classroom, and I said, "What are you doing here?" Well, as it turns out, she had run away from home because she wanted to bring me a present. And that was all she had, the present. She didn't have a toothbrush or anything. So what was her present? She brought me a bowl of 2 living goldfish. She said, "I thought you'd like something living from Pennsylvania," and she was so right because I missed that town with all my heart. The high school where I was teaching at the time was very dictatorial. We lived upstairs from the classrooms, and there were 35 nuns, and they were all older than I, and they were all very strict. I felt like I couldn't even breathe. So after that experience, I paid for my own education at the University of Minnesota. It was the only way the convent would let me go because they said, if we let you study, we know you're going to leave. You're just taking advantage. And I thought, I am not. I just want an education. So they said, all right, then you pay for it yourself, which I did. So after I finished my PhD, they let me teach at the community-owned college. That was a great adventure. That was the first time I actually fell in love. He was a Vietnam vet. He had a Purple Heart, and he was a real challenge to teach because I remember specifically one day I said, is there anything, what price is too high for a man to pay? You know, you become a soldier, you fight in a war. Is there a price that's too high to pay? And he looked at me and he said, you wouldn't know. How would you know? I was over there in Vietnam. I saw my friends die around me. I don't know how you could even ask a question like that. You don't know what you're talking about. So he was very critical. On the other hand, he fell in love with me and I reciprocated. But I made my final vows, and so he said then, you choose. It's either me or your final vows. I wanted him. I said final vows. And so he said, then I'll never see you again. Ironically, I saw him again many years later when I moved to the San Francisco Bay Area after 25 years in the convent. And we got together a couple times, and then he got lung cancer and died. So he was gone quickly, hardly any warning at all. Well, so my life goes on. But the point is, I try to think, what did it all mean? How does one deal with the temptations, the trials, the setbacks in life? I don't think my life is that much different from anybody else's, just because I wore a habit. I still had to struggle with the same struggles everyone faces. One of my particular struggles was crises of faith, just like Robertson, the man whose biography I recently wrote. How do you deal with a crisis of faith when you're in the life? When you've taken vows and committed your life to something like that. And then you think, I don't even know if I believe in God. So when I left, let me talk about when I left. I went on a retreat because I had gone to my Mother Superior and I said, I don't know if I belong in religious life. And she said, well, how long have you been here? I said, 25 years. And she said, 25 years and you don't know if you belong here? I said, yeah, that's right. Well, what makes you think that? And one of the things I said was, well, every time I come here to the Mother House, I get a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. And I said, it's the same feeling I had when I was 14 and I entered the convent. She said, well, you need to make a retreat. So off I went. I was at that retreat house for 3 days. Nobody talked to me. It was a silent retreat, and I was getting very impatient. I had read the Bible as much as I could stomach. So I was walking around, walking every day, walking for hours. And finally, the third day, a priest approached me and he said, I'm here. I'm your retreat director, and I'm here to have our first meeting. So why are you here? And thinking through everything, I said, you know, I think I don't know how to pray. I think if I knew how to pray, I'd be okay. He said, well, you know what? You're not a nun. I said, excuse me? He said, well, I've been watching you. You've been here 3 days. You're pacing around outside, pacing and pacing. You don't walk like a nun. So I said, and how's a nun supposed to walk? And he didn't answer that question. He just went on. He said, you don't dress like a nun. I said, well, nuns don't wear habits anymore. Vatican Council II, remember? He said, well, I don't care. You just don't dress like a nun. You don't wear your hair like a nun. I said, well, this is the way my hair is. I don't perm it. I don't color it. It's just the way my hair is. So I don't know how you can say that. He said, well, I just have one more question for you. And I said, well, what's your question? And he said, how do you feel when I say you're not a nun? And I threw up my arms. I jumped out of my chair and I said, great! And he said, your retreat is over. And that was it. I left.